Hey, Daniel.
Hey Nelson, how you doing?
Good.
Let me turn this up.
Beautiful day.
Yeah, yeah. You're in like Washington or Oregon, something like that, right?
Yeah, I'm in kind of the Seattle area.
Oh, okay.
So you're in Sacramento.
Yeah, Sacramento. Yeah. What's the hat? Is it looks like the Aztecs, but not quite.
Yeah, San Diego State.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah, I went to school in San Diego, so yeah.
oh, nice. You CST?
No, I went to a small
USD?
Catholic film school called John Paul the Great Catholic University.
Oh,
But yeah, nobody's ever heard of it. But it's in San Diego, so I know all the people down there.
yeah, beautiful place. Love it. So yeah, I just saw that you were a part of that in the Pacific Institute, which I heard about from a while back, a long time ago, from Stan Monteith, Radio Liberty, which kind of got me into the whole like politics, economics, all that stuff. Originally got me interested, and they had him on every once in a while. So
That's awesome.
his show's over. So yeah, I like this. I know. Is this your second? I don't know how many debates you've done.
So I did 2 for the tournament, and I wound up losing a 2-1 to Ben Hewitt. And then I also had one with Terrence that you saw the other day.
Yeah. So this is a little different format. It's obviously just kind of a more dialogue style. I sort of prefer it myself, just because it's not just a bam 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 click and then wait. You know,
We can actually talk.
Yeah. So I've got a little shade on my camera to prevent my computer from overheating or whatever.
Okay.
So anyways, okay, I guess we can get into this. Well, thanks for taking this up. I was interested by the debate you had, and I thought you were pretty good. So, you know, as a Christian, I probably would have handed it to you, even though I don't think your points necessarily are valid, but I don't think they were, you know, unfortunately, I think they were not quite answered as maybe I would have. And I like Terrence. He's a great guy. He's a much better Bible scholar than I am, as he is an actual pastor and I'm not. So, but this is a very interesting things. So, I guess let me get started. So again, if for anybody that wants to listen to, and this would include you as well, people that are Bible scholars and the like, you know, there's a lot of them out there. I'm a big YouTuber. So my favorite, Dr. Phil Fernandez, I actually know him. He lives around here. And there's John Lennox, this Irish, a brilliant mathematician, theologian. Frank Turek's great. Ravi Zacharias, some of my favorites. So I think you had your last debate was really about faith, right? I mean, that was kind of the crux of the debate. That was the question that you were really pressing is, beyond faith, what do you have?
I think that was kind of the foundation of it. What I was assuming was he was going to provide arguments behind how his faith is a rational faith, how he gets to that conclusion and is willing to put faith in those elements that are beyond comprehension. But he didn't seem to have many of those arguments. It was more just faith. But yeah.
Yeah, and Joel and Michael had a Sorak and Behind the Veil. Flip those two. We had a nice on that. It takes, at least Joel admits that it takes faith to be an atheist as well, because you have to do a lot of assumptions.
I absolutely agree with Joel on that.
Yeah, and I'll actually bring up a couple of those in this, which I've brought up in several of my other debates as well, where I've argued more specifically on those. So I think faith isn't important. We all have faith in our daily lives. You know, you turn on the computer, you had faith that it was going to work. I turned on the computer. I had faith it was going to work. It didn't. That's why I had to take a few minutes. I had to close out Chrome and reopen it because the mic was giving me error messages. So faith is a very valid tool that we use to go through our lives. And without faith, you know, are you going to go out and watch cars go over the bridge until you feel like it's comfortable enough? Okay, I think the bridge will hold. I think we just have a little bit of faith in a lot of our lives. So blind faith, yeah, I agree. Blind faith can be a problem. And I think many religions do go on blind faith. And it's like the 72 virgins or something like that, right? There's no evidence for that, but it sounds great, right? To some people.
It's a very convenient narrative. It's very, people go, oh, wow, I get 72 virgins if I believe in this? Dude, I'm totally going to believe in it.
Yeah, and it really appeals. So I think that religion really appeals to your earthly desires.
Right.
I mean, after all, they went around the world conquering, and they told everybody, "Hey, join us. When we win, you'll get gold, you get treasure, you'll get slaves, you'll get women, you'll get lots of sex, lots of drugs, lots of rock and roll," whatever their version of that was back then, right? And so a lot of religions really appeal to human desire.
Want some ramen?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I thought you dropped some. So I think that Christianity does not appeal necessarily to human desire. I think Christianity is a religion that really separates itself from other religions by bringing up a type of God that I don't think people would invent. Right? So most gods are like vengeful. Again, Allah has no love for his people. He's very vengeful. He's an angry God. The Christian God is not. And so, so again, getting off my actual long script I had, but I think those are all good reasons for the Christian God, and I'll get into more in a minute. So, faith and reason. I think faith and reason are valid from my worldview, and I'll get into that. The atheist requires reason and empiricism, and again, that's kind of what they got into. That you assume faith. Where does that? Where you under faith assumption you assume reason, and that empiricism works, and then you go off and you do your thing. And the question is, where does that come from? And there's no basis for that in a world without a God. Now, that doesn't necessarily get to the Christian God, but just the mere existence of reason and logic and infinite ideas. The ideas of infinity itself is something that doesn't exist in the real world, but we still think about it in our consciousness, which itself is a basis for something beyond the natural world. So, I do not reason. So as myself, I was gonna say, I'm an economist. Like to see myself as a person who thinks in terms of reason and logic and things like that. I do not reason. I tend to reason my thoughts out mostly. Now, when I do something that I know is unreasonable, I tend to find excuses for it based in some kind of logic, like, oh, if this happened, then maybe, And I think a lot of people do that rationalization, knowing that I'm just rationalizing things, but things that I desire, it'd be great to have healthcare or something like that, but I realize it would violate my fundamental belief system. Even though I say, yes, I would, it'd be great to have free this, free that. That would be wonderful for me. But I realize that in the end, it's, it's not going to work, yada, yada. So, and it violates my basic assumption. So it's not something I would ever advocate for. But I do understand why it's something desired. But in reason, I think reason is a perfect and valid tool, but we as humans fail to use it properly. And that's just, again, that's a Christian worldview right there, is that reason was created by a perfect reasoned God, and that it was man's fall that corrupted reason, and it corrupted everything else as well. Again, some of the arguments that you had brought up in the last debate, I think we would take from the fall. But reason itself is true, is valid. A view without God requires the entire world of the atheist to be a series of foundationless truths. I argued that, morality, that naturalism, or against the idea of naturalism as a foundation for morality. And, again, without a God, you really don't have a foundation to stand from and make claims. And so we can get into that if you want, but you're basically leaping from cloud to cloud, moving platforms. Some of the debates we had on that. Moral laws, I think, require, you made some objective moral statements, and I think they require a objective moral law prescriber. And I also debated that a few times. I won't get into that necessarily, but so, and I think this is I could actually talk about that later if you want to do that. So let me say, for the Christian God though, maybe I'm going on too long. I'll get to the Christian God in a minute. You can go ahead and do an opening statement or whatever if you like. I don't want to take up the first 20 minutes.
Yeah, of course. Let me put my dog in the other room. Hey, Casey, you want to go there? Over there.
Hello, call out.
All right. So
Somebody say
that was my dog Casey. Casey's a red Labrador, very handsome dog, but he's old at this point. But love that dog. Anyway, so
wish I had a cat.
The overall position that I have on this issue is that, well, first of all, the God of Christianity does not seem reasonable to me at all. And I talked about this with Terrence in the last debate, and he probably saw a lot of those points. It was based on a lot of the ideas that there are so many contradictions within this narrative of the Christian God. So I would be interested to see if you can prove that yourself, because Terrence, he was more just sort of saying faith, faith, faith. Faith on its own doesn't mean anything. There has to be some level of reason that leads you to that faith. And I think that you said that as well in your point. Now, my answer to the question of the most reasonable explanation of our world is, quite honestly, right now, we don't know. And you talked about how Joel has talked about we don't need, an atheist does require faith, because the statement, there is no God, does require an element of belief. I believe there is no creator, and that requires a certain element of faith. But I think that the natural state of humanity is to not just believe things until they are shown to be, at least shown to a reasonable degree of certainty, are true. And I talked about this with Terrence, with Santa Claus. We don't believe in Santa Claus because we've seen to a reasonable degree of certainty that he is not true. But if I had a diagnosis from a doctor, there would be a lot of ways that I could reverse check that. I could get another opinion from another doctor. And even though I myself don't know anything about medical science, there would be a reasonable amount of certainty that the doctor has more of a knowledge on this issue than I do. That would be a reasonable time to put faith. In the same way that supernatural mysteries, we might not be able to prove how exactly they work, but if we can first prove the foundation, the core of the issue, the Christianity or whatever religion it is, it would be reasonable to put faith in those elements. But at least with regards to our universe, right now, we do not have enough evidence and enough answers to be able to say conclusively one way or the other what exactly happened. So I would ask what your proof is for the existence of not only a creator, but that creator is specifically the Christian God. Because if that is not shown, if it is unproven or false, like the debate I had with Terrence was, then it would not be worth putting faith in that specific religion. Now, you talk about how faith is a very valid tool. I agree. It is a very valid tool. But there has to be a rational basis for that faith. We don't just put faith in Tinkerbell just because someone said to. First, we find a piece of reason, and then we put faith in the elements that are beyond comprehension. You talked about how the Christian God would not have been invented. Well, there are so many different gods that could have or could not have been invented. Of course, the Christian God could have been invented because it's simply a way of people being able to rationalize their world. And to a certain level, they want to say that it is rational, and yet oftentimes it's based on feeling. I feel like this is the case. I feel like it. And it's satisfying to be like, oh, there's a God watching over me. So it makes sense that they would create a false narrative, or maybe a true narrative. We don't know. That would be based on the evidence. So I'd be interested to see what the evidence you have on that is. You talked about how atheism requires faith. I do agree, but myself and Joel as well are not atheists. We are agnostic. We would say that the answers may exist, but that as of right now, we don't know them. And this leads into the next point. You talked about how reason is often used incorrectly. This is true. Reason is often used incorrectly. But as every single generation of humans has continually built on the knowledge of the past generation, our scientific advancements have moved forward. Our philosophical advancements have moved forward. Our understanding of humanity has moved forward. Our understanding of self has moved forward because we build on the knowledge that the last generation had. So even if we might not necessarily know the answers now, it is very possible that in the future we will have the evidence that is necessary to be able to know what exactly happened with the creation of our world and whether or not there's a creator looking down on us. Unless, of course, you would like to prove otherwise right now. If you have specific evidence showing there is currently the Christian God, that would contradict this. But from the evidence that I have seen, it seems that right now we do not have a conclusive answer. You talked about man's fall. And I mean, we could talk about this, but I think that this is probably a separate discussion, and we kind of touched on it with Terrence, so I'm just going to leave this one alone for the moment, unless you want to go back into that. And objective moral law, I mentioned this in my comment to you. There's a difference between objectivity and absolute truth. The idea of absolute truth is that somewhere in the universe there is a fabric that says yes or no, right or wrong on every single issue. And that idea may or may not be true, but since we are finite beings, we would not be able to know that one way or the other. That is different from the idea of objectivity. Objectivity is the idea that within humans, we should do the absolute best we can to have standards that are able to be agreed upon by both sides to come to reasonable conclusions. And that's different than it ties into the idea of absolute truth, because it's possible that these objective standards that we put down are also the same pieces of fabric that are absolute truth. But it's not the same, because as finite beings, we would not be able to know that. And the reason that absolute truth isn't a particularly important issue to me, and I mentioned this in the comment I gave to you, is either way, if absolute truth exists, then we should be doing our absolute best to come to objective answers that are in line with that absolute truth. And if absolute truth does not exist, we should still do the same thing. We should still be using our best attempt to be objective so that we can lay down the best fabrics of knowledge for our society. But the overall point here that I'm going to come back to, and I'll give it back, Mike, back to you, would be the question of how you come to the conclusion that the Christian God of the Bible is the most reasonable explanation. What is the evidence saying? Actually, there are three fundamental claims of Christianity, and I wrote them down, and you can you agree or disagree with these. The first fundamental claim is that God is the sovereign, all-loving, omnipotent, omniscient, perfect creator, and is the current ruler of the universe. That's the first claim of Christianity. Second is that Jesus Christ became man and died for our sins for the salvation of the world. He is the Son of God and is God himself. And the third fundamental claim is that the Bible is the divinely inspired word of God. If any of those fundamental claims are unproven or inaccurate, then Christianity would be, by definition, unproven or inaccurate. So if you want to say that it is the most reasonable explanation for our universe, I'd like to see the evidence that proves those three fundamental claims. And with that, I'll let you go.
Yeah, so that's a good, concise basis of Christianity. I talked about the gospel, and I think I had told we did 2 debates back to back with Joel that evolution does not go along with Christianity. Like, if evolution were true, then I would burn all my Bibles because they're pointless. Like, there's no reason behind that. So I won't get into that, but yes, I agree with 1, 2, 3. And let me get into that in a little bit. So let me address some of the things that you said. You said we don't know, but still you're putting your faith in more of an atheistic type viewpoint, right? I mean, you're saying we don't know. I realize that. Well, but
I'm going to butt in here just for a moment here. So you understand what I'm saying. I'm not putting faith in anything. I'm saying we don't put faith. There's this assumption that we have to believe something. No, we don't. We could just not believe, because there isn't an answer. In the same way that a cop could be looking at an investigation, they could be looking at who's the killer, and they find information, and there's 3 different suspects. And it'd be wrong for the cop to just say, all right, we have 2 pieces of evidence about this one suspect, so he's the killer, when that is not conclusive yet. The correct answer for the cop would be to say, right now, we don't know. We got to keep.
But he's still going to put faith in his investigative skills, right? And he's going to believe in absolute truth, right? So you have to believe in that there is an absolute truth. So to say absolute truth does not exist it's a self-refuting statement, right? There is no absolute truth. Is that true? If it's true, then it doesn't make sense, right? If it's not true, then maybe it is true. What?
I don't have a position on absolute truth. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, well, we have to say it does exist, though. Because, I mean, you make statements all the time, right? You make statements about all kinds of things.
There's a difference. There's a difference between our finite attempts to be objective and the idea of absolute truth, which is an idea that would only be understood by an infinite being. So if absolute truth exists, then your God, as you would define him, would know it. But we as humans would not.
We could or we could not, right? But I'm saying that it does exist. And anytime you make a statement, you're making a claim of truth,
I mean,
right? Something to be true or false.
There's a difference between objectivity and the idea.
Yes, but you're still making a claim on what is true, that which is true. Scientists deal with absolute truth all the time, right? Cause and effect. You're saying that cause and effect, that the world is a certain way, that gravity does exist, the laws of the universe are basically permanent, and then they go out and they assume that's true. And you can say on faith, but when they go do their experiments, they're still doing something under the assumption that certain things are true. Certain things hold. The law of gravity was it 32 feet per second, things like this, right?
That's different than
I mean, these are basically, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about by absolute truth.
Yeah,
whether God exists or not is.
Can you define what you mean by absolute truth?
Well, just that there are truths out there. There are things that are absolutely true in all places, all times. And right, we could say people say slavery is wrong. Is slavery wrong, or is it okay, or does it matter? Is it sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not? I would say that owning another human being is wrong. I would say that statement is an absolute truth on objective morality, right?
I would say that if it is, you may be correct, and you probably are correct, and that would be based on our finite knowledge. Every piece of evidence that we can put forward and every reasonable interpretation we can do would say that is a truth. But we cannot claim to know absolute truth, because absolute truth is beyond the knowledge of finite beings.
I don't think so. I think the fact that it exists, now there are certain aspects of absolute truth that we might not be able to know, but we can say that it is out there.
To our finite understanding of these things, through our,
and you keep using the word finite as well. So I mean, you're making kind of a.
But by definition, we are finite. We did not create this universe. We cannot exist outside of this universe.
Is that an absolute truth that we are finite?
Probably.
Okay, so we're saying that. So at least there probably are absolute truths. Okay. So at least we got there.
Yeah.
So, but you're making a statement that you believe to be absolutely true. Okay, so you said the natural state of man is to not know, but actually we see that you're saying the humans don't know. That's the natural state of man, or the natural state of the world is to say we don't know. If you want to clarify that statement.
Skeptical until something is shown to a reasonable degree of certainty.
Okay, so I forget who it was. One of the Dawkins or somebody says man is a God-obsessed ape, right? And so I think that humans have an inherent knowledge of something beyond themselves. That is, the natural state of man is to believe that there is a God or there is something out there. Why is it that about 97% of the world believes in some God of some sort? So I'm saying that the natural state of man is to believe in a higher power.
To want to believe that, but not to be.
Well, to actually believe. To actually believe that there is something out there.
But that doesn't mean it is or isn't correct.
No, but I'm saying that where does that inherent belief come from?
It comes from us wanting to have answers.
Where does desire come from?
Desire?
Is that a natural state of man?
I think that is natural, yeah. Okay,
so there are natural laws within the human being, I guess.
Yeah, I think you could say that.
Okay, so we're talking about inherent things, and I think that's something for a world with a God, anyways, right? So
it could be.
Now, the Christian God itself, did you say it was irrational?
I said there were contradictions within the claims presented of the three fundamental points of Christianity. There are many contradictions within those ideas.
Okay, I'd like to hear some of them, and we can get into that. But reason, you mentioned reason. Reason is a it's a non-physical, just kind of like ideas, right? It's a natural law. It's like the law of non-contradiction is a piece of reason, right? It's a part of reason. It's something, it's intangible, right? It's wholly intangible. It's not something that can be worked out through scientific discovery. It is the basis for scientific discovery, right? So I'm just saying there's a separation between reason and knowledge. So yes, over time, man uses reason, which I believe is an inherent within the human being, within the human condition, that there is reason there. Again, that it's not perfect, but it is perfect itself, but humans use it improperly. It's like a knife. A knife has a perfect purpose. People use it for stupid things. Sometimes they use it for evil things, right? But in and of itself, it's got an inherent true and perfect purpose. A knife is meant to cut things. Sometimes people cut people with it, right? But I'm just saying there's a difference between reason and knowledge.
Okay.
So knowledge is increased over time, but it's increased on a basis of people assuming reason is true. Again, the law of non-contradiction and various other aspects of reason that we can use. And where does reason itself come from? What is the platform, the foundation for reason? And at a minimum, the atheist has to say, I have faith that reason is true, that there is a basis for reason, right?
Sure.
So, cause and effect, the world came out of nothing, then why don't other things come out of nothing? They assume that was just a one-time fluke event, that it can never happen again. I go into the lab, I mix two chemicals together, I get a reaction or something. Who's to say that it didn't come out of nowhere? Well, they believe that these natural laws and including the laws of reason are perfect and true, again, objectively true, that this is a universal truth. That is something that exists everywhere at all times. These various ideas, reason. So, okay. So let me get to the basis for the God of the Bible. Number one, so I mentioned a bunch of, I think that these reason and moral laws and things for a God. Now, I think they would also be a basis for a Christian God of the Bible. Now, another one is love. Where does love come from? I don't know. Have you ever loved, or I don't know if you're married or what? You love your dog in a certain way, right?
I would agree. There are certain types of love in the world. Yes.
Yeah. So, I think the Greeks had 5 different words for love, various, right? And so where does love come from? It has to come from somewhere, and it has to be a true and valid emotion beyond just chemicals in the brain, right? Because, if I say, I love you, so I'm married, I tell my wife, hey, I love you. I'm not saying, you know what, chemicals in the brain made me feel funny. They forced these words out of my mouth, right? I'm saying I actually have this physical and unnatural emotional love for you. Well, where does the idea of love come from? So we say God is love, right? The Trinity, well, love takes 2 people or more, right? So and this is where the Trinity comes from, the God of the Trinity. So the Trinity, for it to be love, it must be expressed, but God is one. Hence, you have this idea of one God in 3 persons, the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And the greater love hath no man than he willingly lay down his life for his friends is another basis for the Christian, something that you had brought up in the last time, that why would God have one way and it would be to kill himself, right? You brought that up in the last debate, so we can get into that if that's a problem you have. Can talk about that. But find me another religion where God even cares about his creatures. In Psalms, David says, why do you care about man? Who is man? Man is just this little tiny nothing, right? That we say God created man, but he created him in his own image, so he made him special. And why does he care about man? It's because there's something special. He loves his creation, but he loves man more than anything else. And again, we talked about, well, Judaism is the same way, it's the same God, Judaism. But Allah hates his creatures. He tends to hate his creatures. There's no love there. There's no love in the other religions between. So where does love come from? I think it comes from a biblical Christian basis, or you could say Judeo-Christian traditions, right? The personal God. Right? So I think humans are social, personal creatures. Only the biblical God is a personal God that involves himself with the activities of man. The other gods neither love nor do they really have a relationship with their creatures. Again, we could talk about Psalms or some, the one true God to satisfy what we see in the world in the terms of the social and personal creatures that humans are, I think takes a biblical style God. And you can also get into prophecy. God knows the end from the beginning, right? And only the Bible has prophetic scriptures in the Old Testament that were fulfilled in the New Testament. Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, talks about Israel coming back several times. Jesus predicting in the Old Testament exactly when he would come. And, he told the Jews, why you should have known that this day, this is my day and this is coming. Should have known that it was coming. And only God loves his creatures enough to sacrifice himself for them. And if you want, we can get into that.
Okay. So you're presenting ideas that point to a possible God, but there's nothing there that has proven God in any way. There's nothing there that proves the claims of the Bible. There's nothing there that proves the claims of Jesus. There's nothing there that proves the claims of a creator. It just points to the possibility of it. Just pointing to a possibility is not an argument one way or the other. It's just, here's one theory we can throw out there. Another possible theory that would answer all of your things is deism, that God created the universe and then ignored us. That answers all of the things you just stated, and yet all of your arguments could say the same exact thing, even if they're all correct. And even if your arguments are correct, they don't prove a God. They just point to him as a possible option. Other possible options would be that time is circular, which is what Stephen Hawking has pointed out, or that the universe has always existed, although I don't necessarily believe that one so much. But there's so many different interpretations that would answer your points there. And you still haven't presented any evidence or any arguments that show the three fundamental claims of Christianity are correct. And I'm going to present a lot of arguments right now that are just going to talk about the contradictions. Because I talked about this with Terence.
Okay. Well, let me just say that the idea of an infinite universe is impossible, because you would have to transverse an infinite number of points, and infinity doesn't exist in the real world. I think the idea of God, or even a circular universe, again, you're talking about an infinite universe. Infinity doesn't exist in the real world, right? It's a contradiction.
The same argument would then be applied to God. You're trying.
Well, again, God exists outside. So you need something that exists outside of the physical universe to get these ideas that are within the universe, right? If something exists in the mind of human, it must exist in the mind of an eternal, transcendent being. Because we know time, space, and matter have a beginning, and anything that has a beginning has a beginner. You get into that argument, right?
And I'm gonna follow up on this one right now, because I think what you're proving right now is the contention I made in my first point, which was, therefore the answer is we don't know. You're saying we don't know how an unmoved mover could have created the universe, and therefore God. If you look at the 5 ways presented by Thomas, all of them are we don't know, therefore God. That's not actually the way that syllogism should go. The correct answer should be to say we don't know, therefore we don't know. I would be looking to find an argument, if you can present one, that would say, we know, here is proof right here. Not, here's a possible explanation. Here's proof. Because otherwise, you're not actually answering your own point. You are putting faith in something when there are multiple different explanations, and you don't even have any of the proof in the first point. So I'm not actually even going to go into any of my arguments against the Christian God. I would like to know if you have any evidence that says specifically that the 3 fundamental claims of Christianity are correct.
Okay, so one, God is a sovereign, loving God. Again, you get into the gospel. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believed in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. For God came into the world not to destroy the world, but to save the world, right? So I think there is a vast array of evidence in the Old and New Testament of a loving God, a God that cares about his creatures. Between humans, you have love. Where does that love come from? It has to come from somewhere. And I'd say it comes from can only come from a God that is love. So love has to exist. And as far as the universe, again, the universe has a beginning. We know the universe has a beginning. Anything that has a beginning has a beginner. Well, that beginner must exist outside of time, space, and matter. And that would be a God. So that now the existence of a God doesn't prove the Christian God necessarily. Of course, there are a lot of gods out there. So, but I think that all the evidence we have, even even the most adamant atheists, such as Dawkins, say the world looks like it was created. But of course, that's an illusion because he just assumes that that's impossible, right? So, but he admits, and even Hawkins admits, that the world, you have what's it called, the idea that the universe looks exactly as it would if it were created for humans to live on Earth, right? I mean, you just have little tiny, with the anthropogenic, anthropomorphic principle. Anyways, it's the idea that you have little tiny minute changes in the distance, just anything in the universe, the distance between the planets, the distance between the Earth and the sun, you would have no life on Earth. So it is created exactly as it would be were it created. That's exactly how the universe exists. Even the atheists admit that, and they say, oh, it's all an accident. They come up with all kinds of crazy theories about an infinite number of universes. No, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to do back any of those. Carl Sagan used to, I think it was Carl Sagan or Bernard Shaw, anyways, one of the famous atheists used to say, oh, it's just there, right? The world is just there. I won't waste time on the walking through the woods one, but you come upon a ball, and anyways, he said it was just there, but that's physically impossible. It violates the laws of the universe. Again, infinity doesn't exist in time, space, and matter, right? So infinity must exist outside of time, space, and matter. So number 2 was Jesus Christ. Well, you have prophecy in the Old Testament, and you have eyewitness accounts in the New Testament. Now, these are eyewitness accounts, and we have more evidence of the Bible than we have of any other book in antiquity.
No, they're not.
And now, well, sure they are. They are eyewitness accounts. Paul,
the Bible, the first
some of
Gospels was written 70 years afterwards,
after his birth, but by the same people. And they are saying this is what we saw, right? And in fact, they were written in a time when it could easily be disproven. So they were running around Jerusalem saying, look, Jesus rose, right? And they're saying, no. And they came up with the Judaic book written about the same time saying, no, the disciples stole the body. It's anyways, there's, forget the name of the book, but it's the Jewish leaders of the time saying the disciples stole the body, which is in itself kind of ridiculous. Huh?
That's in Matthew. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, not just in Matthew, but in their own writings, the Jewish writings of the time, saying that I'll find that and post it.
Why is it ridiculous though?
Because it was a Roman legion or a Roman guard was set up in front of the tomb. Are you saying that a couple of fishermen were able to overpower the greatest military force of all time?
It wasn't a Roman guard. It was one Roman guard.
No, it was an entire Roman guard. It wasn't one person. Caesar, he would not have put one guard to guard a tomb that was sealed, by the way, right? And so there was no evidence whatsoever. But they could have easily just said, "Hey, here's the body. You guys are frauds," but they couldn't do it. Okay. So and the prophetic statements of the Old Testament that came true with Jesus himself, 430 or so prophecies that he fulfilled. Okay.
It's unfortunate because we're finally getting to actual evidence, which I would like to go into, but there's 6 minutes left. So this is kind of the sort of thing that I was hoping we would look at, but now it's pretty much out of it.
So we're a little short on time.
Yeah.
But so I think as far as the Bible goes, God requires a perfect sacrifice. You say, why would God kill himself? Well, God requires a perfect sacrifice. Man is imperfect. Only God is perfect. So you look at the Old Testament and the way the lambs and the heifers, they had some 300 or 400 requirements that they had to be looked over, and they had to be perfect in every way. Even a single hair that was white, a single white hair or off-color hair on a red heifer or on a lamb, that lamb was no longer valid to be sacrificed, right? It had to be a perfect sacrifice. Now, if you can find me a human that would fulfill that kind of requirement, well, you only have one human that's ever claimed such.
Well, it's a double story in the first place. Why, if God is perfect, would he create humans that they are so flawed that in order to then fix them, they would have to do this? Why would he create this narrative in which he creates humans so that they will fall, knowing they will fall? And then after they fall, like he knew they would do, then in order to fix it, he has to send his son, who is also himself, who he then gets killed. That is...
Yes, so that's and you brought that up before, and that's the idea of free will, right? I think do you believe free will exists or not, or is it maybe?
Free will, why? I believe free will may or may not exist. Let's not worry about that right now.
Okay, so why? Why free will?
Yeah. Why would God create?
Why would you want to create? Yes. Why would God create humans that are forced to love him? He wants humans to love him back because that is love, right? If you force
God created the rules of this universe. You are assuming there is either free will or not. God could have very easily, because he is perfect, because he is omnipotent, he very easily could have created a universe in which humans are able to freely choose him and yet not be so damned to hell.
How is that possible? If you can freely choose,
perfect.
In order to freely choose,
you are stuck within this idea that God could only do this one thing. You are limiting your perfect God to the idea that the only way he could do this was the way that we see in our world right now. You are limiting your own God. Do you think he is not strong enough to create this better world?
Could you describe the better world, though? Because you're saying you want free will, but you don't want the option to choose otherwise.
Not create a world in which we have free will, and yet we always freely choose good.
But that's not free will, is it?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
God is the one
how is it free will if you can't choose opposite of good? If you only have good to choose from, there's no free will, is there?
You have the option to choose evil, but you have been made good enough so that you actually have the skills to choose good. You would.
So you don't actually have the option to choose evil.
You have the option. You just don't.
So there was one man that had that ability. One man that was never tempted.
God made us poorly. Why would God?
No, he made us perfect. In the beginning, he made us perfect. So he gave us the option.
I'm going to come back.
Okay. So yes.
The design of this world, there's a lot of things that are loving, and that's great. But the flaws in this world would not have ever occurred to a perfect being. Why would a perfect being come up with the idea of creating a world that is imperfect? That should not ever have occurred to him. Why would a perfect being have ever created a world in which sin exists? Why would this perfect being put evil and cruelty and pain and torture into the world? That does not suggest the idea of a perfect, loving God. More than that, if you're saying that this whole reason for God is love, why would God put all of these things that are not loving into the world? War, sin, cruelty in the Old Testament, and then even slightly in the New Testament. God orders murder. We talked about this with Terrence. God does countless evils and atrocities and even orders the Israelites to go forward with these atrocities. That is not a loving God. That is a cruel God. All the evidence that you haven't really presented any evidence until the end there. You talked about the eyewitness accounts, which in another debate we could probably go over those. But at least with what we have here, the only evidence that's out there is the Bible. And in the Bible, God orders atrocities. That's not a loving God. Now, the overall question is God and the Christian God the most reasonable explanation of our world? And even if all of your arguments are correct, all they prove is deism. You can't have shown anything that would show any further than that. So there is nothing that suggests that the most reasonable explanation for our world is this God, especially since there are so many contradictions within it.
So again, you're making appeals to universal morality. You're saying that he committed atrocities. Well, why are they atrocities unless there is a moral law out there? So this I think you have a problem with, is you're saying there is no universal transcendent moral law, no moral law prescriber. But you're calling them atrocities, and you're saying, why did God create this?
According to the abilities that we have as humans, we can objectively say that hurting other human beings is wrong.
No, you can't. That's just how you feel. That's your personal belief, but that doesn't mean it's universally objectively wrong at all.
Specific problems within the individual human who is committing the atrocities. We can see that it hurts the family members of those who die. We can see that it hurts the people who die. We can also say that people have a right to be alive, because it would be the same that we can't take away their property.
But where do you even get the rights from? Where do you even get the idea of rights?
We have
so that's an argument. So I've argued this before. Okay, so the idea of rights and more universal moral law in an atheist worldview, without some kind of moral law prescriber and a creator, all you have is I feel, I don't like. Right, that's not what I would prefer.
Have in a Christian, because all that we have is a finite being saying, "I interpret the words of the infinite being, and therefore I know." And yet,
well, let me say, I would also say that
the words of the infinite. I think that ultimately we're not going to actually get anywhere, because we don't have time.
But I would say that I find it funny. Atheists say that why doesn't God end evil? And then he actually does end evil, and they have a problem with him ending evil because you look at some of the people that he wiped out in the Old Testament; these were wickedly evil people. So I guess that's it. So
God never said that was bad. Jesus never said that was bad.